Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is Thursday and we've got a big show for you today. Let's get right to it. Hurricane Milton has plowed through Florida Wednesday night after making landfall on the Gulf Coast as a Category 3 storm. The storm dropped to Category 1 as it cut across the state, but continued to wreak havoc. Now, search and rescue efforts are underway this morning as Milton brought deadly tornadoes, which killed at least 4 people in St. Lucie County on the east coast of the state. At least 116 tornado warnings had been blasted across Florida before 8 p.m. on Wednesday night. Governor Ron DeSantis said there were at least 19 confirmed tornadoes in the state yesterday. Forecasters say the eye of the storm is moving away from land and into the Atlantic Ocean this morning, but the storm surge flooded streets, wrecked homes, dropped 18 inches of rain in its tracks. Florida residents were trapped under rubble and overturned vehicles in Palm Beach, and more than 3 million homes and businesses are currently without power across the state. It's not over yet. Tampa Mayor Jane Castor said, quote, "At 7 a.m. this morning, when high tide comes in, rivers are going to flood all over." At this moment, the death toll has not been released.
Strong winds tore the roof off Tropicana Field in St. Petersburg. And meanwhile, CNN's Anderson Cooper was smacked with flying debris while reporting live from Florida's west coast last night.
It's coming in from kind of the north, I guess, northeast, and the water now is really starting to pour over. If you look at the ground, whoa, okay, that wasn't good. We'll probably go inside shortly, but you can see the amount of water here on the ground.
A Florida resident nicknamed Lieutenant Dan, whose real name is Joseph Malinowski, has gone viral online for his plan to ride out the storm on his houseboat.
You're going to put me in a shelter. I'm riding out. Don't get me wrong. If I start bouncing around and I start hearing things crack and break, I'm getting the hell out of here. I don't fear the storm. I don't fear anything, but the government, the police, the mayor, everybody's trying to get me to leave in the worst way. I wish they would leave me alone. If nobody saw me on TikTok, I'd be out here by myself right now, doing the same thing I'm doing right now, just sitting here. They don't do anything to help you. They just tell you that you have to leave, that it's a flood zone or whatever, and that you have to evacuate. Well, where am I supposed to go? And how am I supposed to get there? I don't have a car. I don't have anywhere to go. And then you tell me you're going to put me in a shelter. I'm not going to a shelter. I've been to shelters and I've seen what goes on in them. I'm doing my own thing. And if I'm risking my life, then so be it. I'm in God's hands.
Tampa Mayor Jane Castor said things changed yesterday, stating in a press conference, quote, "The Tampa Police Department this morning just saved Lieutenant Dan. He has been rescued and he is now in a shelter as well. If we can get Lieutenant Dan to go to a shelter, we can get anybody to do that." Castor was asked if Malinowski would be arrested for refusing to leave his boat. Castor said, well, Baker acted. The Baker Act is a Florida law where authorities can detain those who are impaired because of their mental illness and who are unable to determine their needs for treatment. But according to some reports online, Lieutenant Dan was spotted on his boat just moments after Castor made her announcement and survived Milton unscathed.
Now, the hurricane has fueled conversation around climate change. President Joe Biden blasted Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene over her comments on the storm.
Over the last few weeks, there's been a reckless and irresponsible and relentless promotion of disinformation and outright lies about what's going on. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Congresswoman from Georgia, is now saying the federal government is literally controlling the weather. We're controlling the weather. It's beyond ridiculous. It's so stupid. It's got to stop.
So we have on our hands a very devastating storm ripping through Florida. Certainly there will be casualties from this. Those totals are going to come later. I think I was most interested in the footage we were getting from News Nation correspondent Brian Enton as he was engaging this Lieutenant Dan person who was determined to remain on his boat throughout the storm. Look, I think it is kind of a tricky situation to handle from the government's perspective. If someone really doesn't want to leave their home, doesn't want to go to a shelter, maybe has some mental illness problem, at one point you just say, well, okay, that's your right, and you're going to pay the consequences for that, and we're going to not deal with this anymore?
I mean, I think it's difficult because is there in that instance a moral obligation to save the person from themselves? That's really what the argument is. And I think that's always a tricky debate, particularly if, and I don't know for sure in his case, but particularly if there's some suggestion of mental illness involved. You get into a whole philosophical debate about that. I did notice that in the clip from Lieutenant Dan that we played, he noted that he had no car. And I do think in a lot of these natural disasters, there is an issue about people not having the means to evacuate, even if they do want to.
Yeah. Sure, and then there's also a lot of confusion around the evacuation system in Florida because there are various evacuation zones, A, B, C, D, etc., and they tell you which zones are mandatory evacuation zones and the rest are sort of within your own judgment. And the evacuation zones changed pretty quickly because this storm moved about 10 miles south of where it was originally supposed to make landfall. So people in Sarasota who might have originally been in evacuation zone D were suddenly moved up to A or B with very little time to actually pack up their things and get out of their house.
And it seems crazy that that's the case, right? That people are having to deal with all the emergencies and emotional chaos of dealing with that sort of crises are also having to keep an eye on ever-changing maps as to which mandatory or non-mandatory evacuation zone they're in.
Right, we saw photos and video footage of people, right, trying to leave the danger zone. Highways, jam-packed, traffic. So that must be stressful if you're sitting in traffic as the storm is approaching. Right. It's just a very dangerous situation.
Right, no, absolutely. Not to drag this back to politics, but it has obviously become politicized. There's been some back and forth between Ron DeSantis and Kamala Harris in particular. He accused her of trying to politicize the storm. Then she said he was being selfish. One of the things I find interesting or curious in the middle of this is that President Biden and Governor DeSantis seem to have been fairly cooperative with each other, and they had another call just this morning where, according to the White House, DeSantis thanked Biden for his assistance. So that's a curious wrinkle in all of this.
Maybe it doesn't, Biden's out of the race, so you can play nice with Biden, you just can't play nice with Kamala Harris.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a specter, too, of maybe the Kamala campaign hoping to give the perception that she has more executive experience than she has by putting her front and center in the storm response. And much like a lot of her campaign, the question is, okay, but what were you doing for the 3.5 years before that? Have you ever tried to call Florida Governor Ron DeSantis during previous natural disasters? And why were you campaigning in Las Vegas until Sunday night after Hurricane Helene hit? So I think Biden is right to sort of try to push her aside because her response does seem political.
Ron DeSantis, I also saw tweet a photo or video of a dog being rescued who was tied to a post in rapidly rising water, or thanked the local authorities for rescuing this dog, reminding people that do not abandon your pets, do not tie them to posts in the middle of a storm. Horrible thing. A lot of people, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis included, were happy to see that dog rescued. We'll be back with more storm coverage and more Rising right after this.